This is the other slide that I include in just about every presentation I give, particularly when I'm speaking with parents. And it's really this idea of pausing and reflecting and intending. As I mentioned, we get busy, we go into autopilot mode, completely normal and really efficient in a lot of ways. But it's really important to be able to slow down and take the time to pause and to reflect on what's going on and intentionally move forward with your parenting strategies. So really as possible and purposeful as possible. Okay, so now I want to consider ways that we as parents, well-intended parents in particular, may misstep with our kids. We're often trying to do the best thing that we can for our kids and don't even realize that our behavior can kind of undermine our intentions. So a couple of parenting pitfalls: reactions, fixed mindset messaging, and then this concept of over each of these and provide some examples. First one we're going to do is this knee-jerk reactions. Okay, so we're going to first consider knee-jerk automatic sort of reactions. And there are a lot of things that might underlie these kinds of reactions, right? And so parenting really pulls us in a lot of different directions, right? Requires us to consider a lot of different things. And there are competing priorities, competing responsibilities that we're managing. And I want us to think about, here are some of the priorities, right? When you think about your role as a parent and your reactions to your kids, what are some of the things that might be driving your sort of knee-jerk automatic reactions? And I've got a list here. It's not an exhaustive list, but just to go through a few. At some level, it's your job to teach your adolescent. It's your job to ensure that they follow rules. It's your job to clarify expectations and to set expectations. You may think it's your job to help them to feel better, to protect them, to minimize their dramatic reaction. We aren't talking about adolescence here, right? To make sure that they do well in school and succeed, to advocate that for them. So there are a lot of priorities that we as parents have when we're thinking about being with our kids and raising our kids and parenting our kids. And so I want you to think about these here for a second and think about sort of what are some of the things that underlie and motivate your reactions to your kids, sort of principles and values that motivate your reactions. What's important to you? And so as you think about that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a hypothetical scenario. And I want you to reflect on sort of what your knee-jerk reaction might be. This is kind of an extreme scenario intended to elicit that knee-jerk reaction. I'll have another one in a little bit that's a little less intense, or a little less potentially activating. So put it up here on the screen. So your adolescent comes home from school and is visibly distressed. They slam their books down and burst into tears, yelling that their teacher totally called them out and embarrassed them when they walked into the class a few minutes late, right before they had to take a test. As tears run down their face, they sob, "This is so unfair." Okay, so given this scenario, just wondering, want you to take a second and think about how you might react if this was your adolescent who came home from school, right, and said this. And then I have some examples of responses that I have heard parents say or may have said myself at some point or another, right? You should not have been late to class. You're late to everything. Haven't I taught you better than that, right? It's not a big deal. It'll blow over by tomorrow. I'm sure nobody even noticed. You shouldn't even worry about it. It's fine. I'm fine. We're fine. How many times have I told you to plan better? What do you expect if you were late? It only seems logical that you would get in trouble. It's a natural consequence. You can do better next time. I know you can. Sort of cheerleading along. I can call the teacher, your teacher, or the dean. I hope it didn't impact your performance on your test, right? So you can see how, particularly if you don't have your oxygen mask on and you haven't taken a pause and reflected on what's going on, these might be some natural reactions that you might have to that situation when your adolescent walks in the door, right? And, you you can really actually think about how they might map on to some of those parenting priorities, right? Well intended. You think you have to teach your kiddo about the rules and make sure the expectations are really clear, and advocate for them and cheerlead for them and support them and help them to feel better. All of the things that are underlying the motivation on these could really be good, well intended, motivating factors. But there are some potential unintended consequences here, right? Um, and basically, without validation of emotional experience, skipping over the feelings that your child is having. So without that validation of emotional experiences, our adolescent feels misunderstood by you. They don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, and they're just not feeling great. Um, the second thing is your adolescent's likely not to hear anything else that you're communicating to them. Probably going to shut down and not hear beyond, anything that you're saying. They're not really going to take it in. If they're not validated, that's typically a point in which people shut down. This isn't unique to adolescence either, but it's particularly relevant in adolescence. Your adolescent may actually feel worse after this interaction. It could be activating and might actually upset them more. And then it's also a relationship misstep, right? Because they weren't seen, because they weren't heard, they may not come to you in the future for some support, walking away thinking, well, right? So if you shift a little bit and you think about how might your adolescent respond to those reactions, right? That's what I did. And then how might they respond if you first said something like this, if this is where you started? That sounds pretty awful. It sounds like you had a rough day. Tell me more about it. Right? In the second scenario, when you validate their experience and validate their emotional space, it's going to open up an opportunity for them to calm down. It's going to open up an opportunity to talk about what actually happened, and you're going to be able to move forward. It also creates this opportunity for a connection in the relationship in a way that was really shut down without the validating. And so if you do this, the second response, you see this little connection that might happen, right? You might feel connected and heard and validated. I want to take a look at another example, this cheerleading example, closer up. So an adolescent may come in and say, so this is less emotionally charged. This isn't like a meltdown. This is just, an adolescent coming in and saying, I'm so nervous about my presentation tonight. And a well-intended parent who, really wants to see their kiddo do well might say, you're always awesome and you'll knock it out of the park. Stop worrying. There's no reason for it. You've got it. You've got this. No problem. So when we take a look at that, you can see how I would imagine that all of us could be the person responding, the parent in this scenario responding, right? Really wanting to encourage our kiddo, trying to do the right thing. But the reality of it is this kind of response invalidates your child's adolescent's emotional experience. And it also communicates that there's something wrong with them because they're worrying, right? Like, don't worry about it. But actually they're worrying. So you're saying you shouldn't worry. Adolescents going, what's wrong with me that I'm worrying? Why am I worrying? They don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. And now they have the additional pressure, right? So in the end, your adolescent probably feels worse about this, right? Again, I'm using these illustrations to highlight how we can inadvertently miss these opportunities for connecting with our adolescents if we're not purposeful in validating, right, and supporting them, and not prioritizing that. We can have some fallout. And still get to the things that we value in that initial slide or one of those earlier slides once we regulate, once we calm, and once we settle, right? So there's the cheerleader. I forgot to put her in the slide there. So let's think about another option, right? So adolescent comes in and says, I'm so nervous about my presentation tonight. Excuse me. An alternative response might be, it sounds like you're feeling stressed out about it. I know this presentation is important to you, so that makes sense. You can add another statement. Is there anything I can do to help? You can add another statement if you need to. I wonder about the presentation. I wonder what about the presentation is making you feel nervous. And then you can even go so far as to say, I wonder if there's been anything in the past that has helped you with these feelings before. So you pause after each one of these statements and you may choose to go forward with them, but you can see how meeting your adolescent where they're at and validating their emotional response creates opportunities to help them actually reflect and problem solve and get out of that really highly sort of anxious state, right? So given this, want to think about considering a parenting priority and responsibility as validation, really validating your adolescent's emotional experience, which allows you to connect with them. It creates an emotionally safe environment that welcomes and invites reflection, communication, and collaborative problem solving. Right? So it really opens the door to be able to do the kinds of things that you want your adolescent to be able to do as they develop and as they grow. Let's see here. Validate emotional experiences. I think there's sometimes some resistance to validating. There's knee-jerk reactions that just get in the way. And then there's parents who think that validating means things that maybe it doesn't. And I just want to clarify, validating is seeing the situation from your adolescent's perspective and accepting their feelings as they are, not trying to fix them, not trying to change them, but just accepting them as they are. It doesn't mean you agree, like, oh, you should feel anxious, or oh, you should be upset, or you should not be upset. It just means that you see them and you're accepting them as they are. And it doesn't mean you're giving them approval. Like, I'm not really approving of this temper tantrum that you're throwing, but I do see you and I do hear you. And again, validation and genuine curiosity to understand your teen's experience opens the door for stronger parent-child relationship.
Thank you so much again, Renee, and thank you everybody for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.